At DDI, we turn data-driven insights into dynamic leadership development, unlocking potential, sparking growth, driving performance, because better leaders create a better future.
Hello and welcome to today's webinar, All Guts, No Data, Why Your Leaders Need Assessments Now. A few housekeeping tips before we begin. You can find today's slides in the additional resources section of your console. This webinar is being recorded and you will receive the link to watch on demand later today. The attendee chat feature is open and we encourage your comments and responses. To submit a question to our presenters, please use the Ask a Question box. And now let's bring in today's presenters, Vice President of DDI's Professional Services, Kevin Tamanini, and DDI Managing Consultant, Scott Bryant. Welcome, Scott and Kevin. We're excited to have you today.
Thanks, Kim. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Good morning. We are thrilled to be here to talk to you today about this very hot topic. And if we just use the number of registrations as well as the growing list of attendees on this webinar as evidence, this has clearly struck a chord with a lot of you. And we are more than happy to dive into the deep end, spend some time with you to talk about assessments, the use of assessments, and how to start to rely on data and avoid some of the gut reactions and gut insights that people may be using. As we get into this, I wanted to take a minute and kind of pull this title apart and share with you some reasons as to why I think that it's resonating so much with what's going on right now. To start off, let me start with the assessment side and why we believe that leaders need assessments now. Many organizations are focusing on building their bench strength, their leadership capabilities, but they're doing so typically from just one perspective, one outlet, and that's training. And interestingly, there isn't a whole lot of debate on what does training mean. People talk about that. They know that it's showing up to a session, whether that's virtual or on site, talking to a facilitator, getting insights about a new skill, hopefully having an opportunity to practice that skill, and then finding opportunities to bring it back on the job. And at DDI, we believe wholeheartedly in the use of training, the use of content to develop leaders. But we also believe that in order to truly build better leaders for a better future, you need to go beyond training alone and leverage tools to provide clarity for stakeholders around individuals and their strengths, their development needs, and what needs to focus on organizational impact. It's not just about letting stakeholders and leaders within the organization rely on their own expertise of what good looks like. Part of this is we need you to challenge them around their thinking about what they believe they know and move beyond their gut instincts. And a quick example I just wanted to share with you that I think helped make this resonate even a little bit more for me was recently, those of you that follow golf, the US Open is a major golf event that happens every year. Happened 2 weeks ago here, just outside of Pittsburgh at Oakmont Country Club. And I had the opportunity to take my family with me. And before you retract too much on another sports analogy, it's not about the golf. It was cool to see the players show up and seeing them and play the game. But for me, we took my entire family and we got there very early, about 8 a.m. and we walked around. We followed some people across the course for a couple hours. We sat in some spaces and just watched some people coming through. And we were there until about 6 p.m. at night. And on the way out, we decided to make a little game. And we said, hey, how many steps do you think we took as we walked this course? Acres and acres of course. And my daughter said, we said, don't look at your smartwatch, don't look at your phone. But what do you think we walked? And we made it very high stakes. Whoever was going to be the closest got to pick where we went for dinner. And my daughter said, it was probably about 10,000. My son kind of used that as a gauge and said, it's probably closer to about 2,000. My wife said, I think it's about 15. And I'm like, well, I'm looking at them and thinking about this. I said, I think it's 20. My wife pulled up her smartphone tracker and from her smartwatch, and it was 16,780 steps, almost 7.5 miles. But I think that this illustrates exactly what we're talking about. Our gut, I mean, we are experts in walking. We walk every day. We track our steps constantly. And yet each of us was off. Some of us weren't even close. My wife won, and she got to pick for dinner where we went for dinner, which is typically the case. But for us, it highlights how do we start to move beyond this just perception of what we believe is the right answer and move towards something that is data-driven, that is objective, that gives us the best insights moving forward. And so you're here today, hopefully, because we need your help, and I think you need some of our help to leverage data from assessments. And it's not just about using any assessments. It's about using the right assessments to make the right decisions about developing, promoting, and hiring leaders into the organization to drive organizational impact. And so, as Kim mentioned, my name is Kevin Tamanini. I'm the Vice President of Professional Services here at DDI within our North American operations. And I'm joined today by Scott Bryant, who is a managing consultant extraordinaire on our consulting team. Both Scott and I have a lot of experience and hopefully expertise with working with our customers who are facing challenges related to developing, hiring leaders. And we work with them a lot in this space. I've been with DDI for almost 20 years. Scott's been with DDI, I believe, Scott, for almost 30 years now. And we've worked with the organizations on leveraging assessments for emerging leaders, new leaders into the organization, frontline, mid-level, executive leaders. And so we've seen a lot of things about what works, some areas of where there's challenges, and how we need to help influence key decision makers as they work on making this transition to leverage assessments and data-driven insights. And that's what we're here to talk with you about today and how you can start to do that. So we have our expertise, but you also know your organization's best. Where I wanted to start with, though, as we get into this, was a question to you all. And I mentioned to you, many organizations tend to rely exclusively on training. So when we talk about assessments, what I'm curious about is, what does that mean to you? So in the attendee chat, if you wouldn't mind as we go, start to type in, what does assessment mean to you? What does it mean within your organization? What is the word? What is the phrase that comes to mind for you as you hear this? What does assessment mean? As we're waiting for some of your responses along the way, what I'll start to share with you is this question was asked to me early in my career at DDI, and I found myself give an answer to what my perspective was. And then the leader asked me, well, what do you think your HR and talent partners believe it is? And I found myself giving a slightly different answer. And then he asked, well, what do you think the leaders who are going through the assessment believe? And I found myself giving an even third answer. And it made me realize that unlike the definition of training, assessments mean very different things. As I'm looking at the chat, I see succession planning, I see skills assessments, evaluations of KSAs, insights. I see clarity, objectivity, true data. This is fantastic. Inventories, figuring out baselines of information. And all those are really resonating a lot with me as I hear you talking about it. Kryptonite, that's a fascinating one. I'd love to dive into that one a little bit more. What I'm going to do is build out this slide because we've asked this question, or we've had many customers who have come to us and said, here's what I need from an assessment. Here's what I'm looking for. And sometimes we get objective, sometimes we get data-driven, but we also hear things like it needs to be about self-insights. Could be a day in the life, could be focusing on personality, skills, feedback, performance management assessments that leaders do on a regular basis. 9-box, it may be very specific to a type of a tool that a leader may have been exposed to, but they have a very specific thing in mind as they work on this. And this word cloud, I think, is evidence of what a lot of you were chatting about and sharing in the chat about what does assessment mean. And I'd like to use this a little bit as a call to action. Can we start to use today as a launching pad to create a more consistent and a shared definition of what do assessments mean that everyone can rally around? For us, we believe that it lives in the middle of this word cloud. Objective evaluations that are based in science and research that are directly tied to measuring the skills that are critical to driving business performance to inform data-driven decisions. And ultimately, that's what we think is going to be the right setting, launching pad for moving forward as we align on this. Because for us at DDI, we truly believe in this. Before I move on, Scott, what's your reaction as you think about this word cloud and a lot of those comments that were coming through the chat as well?
Yeah, I love to see the comments and the overlap between the comments that we're seeing in the chat and what we see in this word cloud. When I think about what I think of when I think of assessment, and there's a word that we've talked about a couple times. It doesn't show up on this word cloud exactly the way I'm going to use it, but the word that I think of is insight. And I think the promise of assessment is that it's going to give us new insight. It's going to give us insight that can help drive a decision. It can give us insight into how we focus and accelerate someone's development. And sort of implicit in that word insight is it's going to give us something that we don't already know, right? It's going to give us insight that's not just a confirmation, but it's going to give us new data, new insight.
Excellent. Love it, Scott. And I think that it's a key theme for us as we go throughout today's discussion, which is how does that gut, which may be directionally okay, it doesn't give insights though and tell us things that we don't already know. For us at DDI, we fundamentally believe that assessment data provides leaders with the right decisions and information to make those better decisions and get insights fundamentally. For us, we are all about the science of leadership, and we've poured every ounce of our 50 plus years of research into building assessments that are accurate, engaging, and to Scott's point, deeply insightful. We want to give you that smartwatch to track your steps better instead of relying on your guesses on how many steps you took. And we fundamentally believe that objective data is the key to driving great leadership capability. Our assessments, and we'll talk a little bit about them later on, are award-winning. They're focusing on providing confidence to you all as HR and talent professionals and to decision makers within your organizations around your leaders and what they need to be focusing on. Part of this is that we need to understand if you aren't or haven't talked to us about using assessments to solve your leadership challenges, today's the starting point. Let's do that now. Let's use this to initiate that conversation because we need your help in driving this within the organization. As I mentioned, we have a lot of expertise in doing this. You are the experts of your organization and of your leaders' needs so that we can focus on the right areas. As we do this, I want to talk about what that role is that you all can help us play within the organization. And every 2 years, we conduct the most extensive and long-standing leadership study of its kind. We recently released our 2025 Global Leadership Forecast. Some of you may have participated in that. Some of you may have actually received the report from that as well. But it continues to drive our insights around examining leadership practices across the world to drive business impact given industry and economic uncertainties. And so for over 2 decades, this research has really provided deep insights to us on what are the implications that you all can play from an HR and talent perspective. This year, we involved just under 11,000 leaders across almost 2,000 organizations. And one of the trends that we've seen going back starting in about 2018 was the evolving role that HR and talent leaders need to play within organizations. Back in 2018, the data was telling us leaders were looking for HR and talent leaders to be anticipators. So the reactors are those people that are focusing on responding to policies, procedures, kind of that stereotypical HR type of a role. Many saw as partners, and partners are really good because they provide an outlet for collaboration and for shared understanding. But what business leaders were telling us is that they wanted to see people who were anticipators, using data and analytics to drive insights around things that they hadn't been considering. What are the tools? What are the processes that they can leverage to do that? Unfortunately, as you can see from this data, that trend hasn't really shifted a whole lot. And unfortunately, there's some major events, COVID in the middle of this data collection, even current uncertain economic turbulence that's been occurring, has been actually pulling down the partner side, increasing the reactor role, and decreasing the anticipator role. And in this session, what we'd like to do is try to equip you with some fuel so that you can go back to your stakeholders with what they need, and they might not be thinking about, to drive recommendations that are tied specifically to outcomes. And we know this because through our research and hot off the press today, we have our new HR Insights report that you all have access to as part of the materials from this webinar. But this data that you see is coming from that report. And what I encourage you to do is dive in after we go through our conversation today. And one thing that it's showing here is that HR does play a strategic role in driving outcomes related to the organization. And what our data showed here was that organizations where HR and talent professionals were viewed as anticipators, there was substantially higher quality of leaders, and the percentage of successful high potentials was much higher than for both partners as well as those that were reactors alone. And so for me, that's really important. But I think a key takeaway is what you see in the yellow box below the bars, that those organizations where HR was serving as in an anticipator capacity, had an anticipator mindset, were nearly 2 times more likely to use assessments effectively in the hiring and promotion, succession decisions, and focus on development. And so now is the time that we need each of you to embrace that HR anticipator mindset so you can forecast, align, deliver for your stakeholders and business leaders to move away from their gut instincts and start using objective assessments to drive insights and data-driven decisions across the organization. So what Scott's going to do is he's going to share with you some scenarios that highlight many of the challenges that we see that lead to these gut decisions, why they're happening, and also our recommendations that we'd like you to consider to help better inform decisions around the use of assessments for moving forward. So Scott, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Kevin. We are going to start this with a poll. And so we're asking you a question here, as you can see. So which of these have you or maybe are you currently experiencing, right? So there are a number of reasons why organizations and individuals are going out and saying, I need a better way. I need to focus on assessment. So take some time to read through these, select the ones that apply to you. You can select as many as you like, or you can select all, and remember to hit that submit button. But as we look at these, we see a bunch of different kinds of things coming up. One, and I've seen this in the chat a number of times already, leaders might not be as good as they think they are at evaluating skills. So they're going more on their gut, and the data is showing us that it's not that accurate. We're hiring and promoting the wrong leaders. So when you step back and look at the people that you're bringing in from the outside, especially at more senior levels, at the people that you're promoting from within, what's your hit rate? Many organizations are basically saying it's not as high as we want it to be. Executives don't have faith in our talent data. So there are many indicators that basically say, when an opening comes available, we aren't using our talent data. We aren't using the succession slates to make that decision. We're now going to the outside. That's a really implicit way or explicit data point that basically tells us that our executives don't really believe in the data that we have through our talent review process, through our succession process. We have high potentials that are stuck and not moving, and development isn't personalized enough. You see about 50% of folks have submitted responses, and so hopefully everybody can see the poll and are looking at that. In just a couple of minutes, we're going to show you the results, and then we're going to dive into some of these specifically. I didn't mention this, but if you have others, and some are already doing this, but if there are other challenges that you're experiencing not on the list, please add those in the chat. We'd love to hear them, and perhaps in the Q&A we'll have time to attend to some of those as well. So I'm going to try to advance the slide and show you the results. We'll see how good I am at that, and then we'll dive into some of these. All right, so you should be able to see those on the screen now. We've got a whopping 75% that agree that leaders aren't as good as they think they are. About 51%, almost 52% of you talk about hiring and promotion. High potentials are stuck. Executives don't have faith. So a lot of good insight there, a lot of good variance in what we're seeing. The personalization's coming in there as well. So let's dive into some of these, and I'm going to skip around a little bit and sort of cherry pick, and some of these overlap as you can see. Let me start with the one about we're making the wrong decisions, we're promoting and hiring the wrong people. So here, there are a number of reasons why this is happening, right? Number one, it goes back to that sort of first question, our leaders aren't as good as they think they are. They have some bias in the equation, right? And there are a number of different kinds of bias that can creep in. There's the I'm looking for someone just like me bias. There's the halo effect. There's a first impression bias that sometimes people just can't shake. Often when we're making a promotion decision in particular, we're looking at the candidates and we're looking at those hard skills, but we're not assessing for fit. Fit can be really, really critical. I have a client who has used assessment for a long time. That assessment is not a make or break, it's not a pass fail, it's a data point that they integrate into their decision-making progress or process. On occasions, when they hire a person who doesn't turn out to be a fit, what we've done is help them go back and look at the data. And in almost every case, the signs were there, the red flags were there. And so that's a lesson in, if you're using assessment, the data's there. We have to really use the data. Finally, when we make promotion decisions, and this factors into why leaders aren't as good at evaluating skills, is we tend to over-index on current performance. And that's the thing that we can most readily see. And so that's sort of what we focus on. And especially as we're forecasting someone into the future, that's a flawed process, right? Because what made them successful in their current role is probably not the full picture of what's required to be success in the next role. So as we look at the remedies for this, obviously we want to have a comprehensive approach. This goes back to fundamental job analysis, competency profiling. So a comprehensive look at what does it take to be successful, including some of the fit aspects. So motivation, personality, as well as skills. And then we can target really objective tools that will help us make those decisions. Those assessments will sort of help us evaluate people against the future requirements and not just what we've sort of seen in the past. So making hiring decisions, promotion decisions, this to me is one of the easiest use cases for assessments. This is a promise that assessments can absolutely deliver value on. Pause there, Kevin, if you have a comment.
No, I think that's spot on. And this idea of the cost of a poor hire is also incredibly high. And so making sure that we are using tools to mitigate risk associated with costs, investment of time, resources, as well as provide deep insights. The Department of Labor estimates the cost of a poor hire is 30% of their first year salary. Sometimes that goes up to even 200% of that. And so making sure that we're using this to help refine our focus on skills is key, and also minimizing risk to the organization.
Great, appreciate that. Let me move on to another one, and let me see. I'm going to focus on one of the questions about, I think, our hypos, and our high potentials are stuck in the succession process, and they're not really moving. And this is a really acute problem that I see in a lot of organizations. And the scenario kind of looks like this. Last year we did talent review and Jane was ready in 1 to 2 years. And this year we do talent review again and Jane is still ready in 1 to 2 years. And not much has changed. There's not been much movement. That's a really frustrating element for our senior executive teams and for the organization to say we've sort of done the work, we've evaluated potential, we've started trying to develop but we aren't seeing movement. The number one culprit, the number one why that I would focus on is the third bullet there, and that is readiness is not objectively evaluated. So our talent review process, and specifically if you're using a 9-box, what you're really measuring in a 9-box is potential, right? The two axes on a 9-box are typically performance and potential. And you're trying to figure out who has the capacity to grow and to become a leader at some point in the future. What I see organizations do is they over-index and put a lot of rigor into that kind of judgment. And then when the conversation shifts to readiness, it's not much more than a finger up to check the wind direction. It's not very rigorous at all. And moreover, what I see organizations do is sort of rush to a question about time. And so what we want to put a label on the person is they'll be ready in 1 to 2 years, or 3 to 4 years, or 3 to 5 years, or whatever the categories are. And the flaw that I see there is you can't really answer the time question until you answer the if question. So the critical question isn't they'll be ready when in a number of years or months, et cetera, but they'll be ready if. They'll be ready if they have these experiences. They'll be ready if they have this, if they close the skill gap, right? And so if we answer that question, then we can put a time on it. But the number one suggestion here is your talent review process should be closely linked to your assessment strategy. And coming out of talent review is the perfect time to look at those high potentials and now assess readiness. One of the things that I would also add is we have to make sure that we are delineating performance, potential, and readiness as really, really different things. And the way that we assess those are very, very different. So using, for example, an objective assessment to look at someone's readiness for the next level. So we're forecasting them into the future and seeing where they stand relative to those requirements, identifying the gaps, and then moving people into an accelerated development program. Now, that doesn't say the 9-box isn't valuable, but I think too many organizations stop when they have placed the person on the 9-box, and then there's a very casual view of, well, what do we need to do next? How long do we think it'll take for them to get ready? Something I saw in the chat that I always wanted, that I also wanted to look at is the second bullet down. Sometimes we just get it wrong. Sometimes we just pick the wrong people. And part of that is looking at things like growth mindset. So as we're evaluating potential, there's also a place for assessment there. Potential has a lot to do with motivation, it has a lot to do with personality, and there are a lot of tools at our disposal that we can use in that 9-box process or that talent review process to inform our decisions and not make it just the manager's job to make a call, render a judgment. And for the most part, what I find leaders who are participating in talent review is they are craving assessment data. They don't want it to be all on their sort of judgment or gut reaction. They like the structure. They like the additional insight. So Kevin, any comments there? I know we're running a little bit low on time.
Nope, I think it'd be good to hit one of the other topics for sure.
Yeah, let's see. I'm going to go to just the very next one, and that also garnered about 50+% of the votes, but development isn't personalized for my leaders. And this isn't just talking about high potentials, but just in general. And I think the reason why development typically isn't personalized is it seems difficult, it seems complex. It seems like we might get a bigger bang for our buck, a bigger ROI if we just focus on the group. We sort of focus on the organizational needs as opposed to the individual needs. What we're hearing from participants, and if we think about participants as our customers, what we're hearing from them very loudly is, I want my development to be focused on my specific needs. So how do we do that? And the big sort of advice that I would have here is we don't have to choose between a group development approach and an individual development approach. So the number one thing is you can have an assessment that runs alongside your group development and provides data that will inform an individual development plan while you're doing the more programmatic, the more systematic group development that may be based on a larger needs analysis. You can also infuse assessment into your development programs. A very easy way to do that, in a way that we're doing that with a lot of organizations, is to use a personality measure as pre-work for a course that someone's going through, so that as they go through the course, they're not only learning new skills, new techniques, new methodologies, but they're also figuring out, how is my personality going to either enable me to do this, or perhaps it is a limiter for me, and I'm going to have to figure out how to manage around that. So that's a very easy way to sort of bridge the gap and do a little bit of both. So the big aha here is, it's not an either or. It's not I either have to personalize development, or I have to have a group approach. It's achievable to do both. I know a number of people have had to drop off, and we're at about 30 minutes. We do have some time to sort of focus on a few more things, and also some time for Q&A. So Kevin and I will be around for that. And so Kevin, I'm going to turn it back to you for just a few more slides before we get to Q&A.
Thanks, Scott. And I think this last example is a really good one, because we constantly hear from our customers, from leaders within the organization, that they want personalization. And what better way to drive personalization than having an assessment that targets them as the individual, that we can then link into focused development that they may need. Sometimes that may be one-on-one, sometimes it may be part of a broader group engagement. But either way, understanding that the diagnostic, the assessment tool itself, does that ultimate personalization. And for us, one of the things that I think is important is, again, part of our HR report that just came out. Let's face it, HR you're faced with a lot of things to do, a lot of pressure, and how do you scale this in a way that makes sense? What this data is showing is the return on investment that leaders have reported receiving from these various outlets. And you can see that objective assessments, not self-insight tools, but these that really get it to a more rigorous and robust evaluation of skills, is providing the highest return on investment to organizations. Shortly behind that, you see is also 360. So there are tools that have good structure, that provide good insights, that can help to inform more objective evaluations, to provide data-driven insights to decision makers. And again, it's not a one or another or the other. We think it's a mistake when organizations choose to only do one thing to focus on development, maybe training. But we also know that the power comes in when you start to combine these along the way. And not just from an ROI perspective, but what we've seen is organizations that are using a combined approach of both an assessment and training tools are nearly 2 times more likely to be among the top performers financially in their segment. And so the data is very clear to us. At DDI, we have a lot of tools that fit into this assessment arena, tools that are specific to frontline leaders, to mid-level leaders, to executives, because one assessment doesn't fit all needs. In either case, what we need to be trying to figure out is what's going to be the right fit for the solution that you have, not what's an assessment that we can use. And understanding that it's the insights that are gained through the process, through the data, to inform specificity, clarity, guidance, and insight to make data-based decisions. And so fundamentally, there's a lot that goes into these. One of the key pieces that some of you may be sitting back and thinking about is, and I've seen this throughout the chat as well as this has been going on, which is, I get it. I like that, the clarity of the definition, the scenarios and the challenges, they resonate. And I like that there's tools that are available, but, and then the but comes in. I have executives that aren't bought into this, or I have a lot of assessments, but none of them are working. And so we wanted to use this session as a scratching of the surface on this topic. Assessments, there's a lot that goes into it. And so for us, this is the first in a series of webinars that we want to do as we start to talk about how to equip you as HR and talent professionals to guide your leaders and your organizations into this process of leveraging assessments. And that's where our next session is going to come into play, where we focus on why do leadership assessments and the use of leadership assessments fail within organizations. Many times when there isn't a coherent assessment strategy or framework, they start to fall apart, and understanding how do we help support the longevity of using this to drive more consistency across the organization for leaders, for stakeholders, and for those participants that are involved. And so we covered a lot today. And what I'd like to do is take a pause now and open it up for any questions that the group may have. And Kim, maybe there's some things that you've been tracking also through the Q&A that we can address directly. Oh, sorry for that. Coming attraction, our next webinar will be on July 22nd, where we dive into this in much more detail. Kim, are you there?
Kevin, I'm going to direct you. Yes, I am. I'm going to direct you to our Q&A folder. We have a lot of questions that have come in. So I think if we can spend the next 5 minutes, Kevin, are you able to see those? Kevin and Scott, are you able to see those questions? So I think for those of you, again, if you need to drop, we will be sharing the recording later this afternoon. We hope you'll join us for the part 2 of the webinar on July 22nd. And I think we can take probably the next 5 minutes to dive into some of the questions that have come through. So Kevin and Scott, I'm going to let you dive into those questions.
Excellent.
Right. So Kevin, do you see one you like there?
I think that there's a question I see here on tips for getting leader support and committed to the implementation of the use of assessments. And some of what we tried to do today was to highlight data points and research that drives it. So fundamentally, getting people away from their own perception of that their instincts are valuable and are important. Part of it is not negating that. It's not about saying, don't bring your insights into this as a leader within the organization that has seen people perform. But when that's the only decision point, when that's the only data point, how do we supplement that with other types of tools and outlets and resources? And so a big part of this is business cases. What I have found is that leaders within organizations look to data to inform their business decisions on what do you focus on from a product, a customer, a marketing perspective. So there's no reason you can't pull the same type of data that we've been sharing today into that conversation to highlight the value and the impact and utility that assessments can provide.
Great, thanks, Kevin. See a number of questions here. I'll try to hit a couple. One is how do you get someone ready for a role that's going to require people leadership if they aren't currently a people leader? Certainly, there's an assessment component to that question as well as more of a development component. The development component could be a number of things like particular assignments that give them, some leadership authority, whether it's a project or a task force, et cetera, just to try to start to exercise that muscle. I think many of the assessments that we use to assess readiness specifically are also like a day in the life simulation. And so those kinds of assessment have a unique advantage because they not only give you a diagnostic, they show you where a talent gap might be, but they also serve as a development experience because you're put in a simulated environment and you're told, hey, you're going to wear these shoes today and you're going to do these activities. So you start to gain experience as well as being evaluated and given some feedback. Another question that just popped up to me is, what if you have more hypos than you have opportunities? And that's more of a talent review process question, but I'll just speak to that for a second. I think it's a really important question, and your talent review, your hypo programs, if you call them that, should be right-sized to the opportunities that you're going to have in the organization. If you can forecast growth, retirements, whatever the things are, and make sure that you don't have a group that is exponentially bigger than the actual opportunity, because that's going to create expectations and might not serve you as well. That doesn't mean that people aren't hypos, aren't continuing to grow and develop. But if you're going to have a formal program, I think it's smart to make sure that it's right-sized to the opportunities that you can actually forecast.
Thanks, Scott. I think we can maybe take one more question, just giving our timing. And one that's popping out to me here was asking about assessments and differentiated assessments based upon the focus within the organization, whether it's sales or marketing. One of the things that we feel like is important is making sure that we understand and how to pull apart pure leadership capabilities from technical expertise. And when we talk about focusing on leadership development, the more that we can focus on core skills that don't have to be grounded in an area of expertise. I think that there's an important aspect that we can relate to what's being evaluated in an assessment. But fundamentally, core skills should look the same whether you're marketing or sales or operations. And so, yes, we want to make sure that it's relevant to the level, though, for sure. So frontline leaders need very different skills than mid-level leaders, than executives. And how we go about gathering that shouldn't be through the same use of the same tool. There are some tools out there that people will recommend using across every level. And I understand the perceived simplicity of that. That also starts to raise a question for me, which is the level of insight that you're getting. And oftentimes the depth of insight should be aligned with the level and the rigor of the assessment that someone is going through. So understanding that we should align, what are you looking to achieve from an assessment? What's the data you're looking to get out of it? And then we can align the type of assessment to that accordingly based upon the key skills that they're designed to measure and evaluate individuals on. So it requires a conversation to understand what that context is so that we're focusing on the right areas and that we're identifying the right tools to deliver the right insight and impact to the organization.
I think with that, we will go ahead and close out. Thank you, Kevin and Scott, for sharing a lot of great information today. Thank you, everyone, for attending. We hope you'll join us again on July 22nd. Again, you will receive the recording later this afternoon. If you have a really pressing question that we weren't able to get to today, please use the Contact Us button at the top of your console, and a DBI rep will be in contact with you immediately. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
All right, thanks all.
Thanks, everyone.